Started in the interest of time. I will officially. I only get a gavel in the in-person meeting, so I'm going to use it. I call to order the annual Portland Public Schools budget hearing. My name is Harmony Quiros. I'm the chair of the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission. Welcome everyone to today's hearing. As a reminder, the TSCC is a community oversight commission established by the Oregon legislature. The commission oversees the budgets of all TSCC member taxing districts and annually conducts a thorough budget review and certification process. Additionally, the TSCC holds public budget hearings like this one to engage with district leadership and provide additional opportunity for public comment before budget adoption. I'll now ask my fellow commissioners to introduce themselves and state if they have any business relationships with the district that could be perceived as a conflict of interest.
Hello, my name is Mark Webold. This is my 6th year with the TSCC. I see some familiar folks' faces out there. This is my 6th hearing with you folks. My day job, I'm a senior policy analyst in the President's Office of Portland State University. And I have no business dealings with the district that could be perceived as a conflict of interest.
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Donahue. This is my first year on the commission. Started in January. And I am a public finance banker and municipal advisor for DA Davidson during the day. And I have no business relationships with the district. I have 2 daughters in the district who are going to be at Grant High School, and they're seated over there. I dragged them to the meeting. Yeah, thank you.
Hello again. I'm Margot Norton. This is my 7th year on the commission. As are many public officials, we are term limited, so I and my colleague, Mr. Offsink, who couldn't join us today, are in our penultimate year. Next year will be our last hearing. I am a retired government finance professional. My last post was at Metro. And my attendance area is Alameda Elementary, Beaumont Middle, and Grant High School. I have no conflicts of interest with the district at this time.
I'll introduce myself real quickly. My name is Harmony Quiros. This is my 3rd year with the TSCC, first year as chair. I am a previous member of the CRBC for Portland Public Schools, the Budget Committee, and I started my career as a teacher. I currently work in K-12 science curriculum and development. I have a upcoming 3rd grader and incoming kindergartner at Atkinson Elementary, where I am the outgoing PTA president, and I also served on the Southeast Guiding Coalition over the past year. But I have no other relationships with the district and certainly no conflict of interest. Would the district representatives please introduce themselves?
Well, good evening, commissioners. Thank you for your service and for being with us here this evening. As you know, this is an annual tradition. So for those that I haven't met, I'm Guadalupe Guerrero. I have the privilege of serving as superintendent of the Portland Public Schools. Thank you for some of the questions that you've shared. Staff is here prepared to respond to anything you may want to inquire about. With your permission, just a few brief opening remarks here, if that's okay, Chair.
If we could just do introductions, I want to make sure we introduce our staff and set the agenda for the night, and then we'll let you do your introductory remarks.
And I am Norberto Delgadillo, Chief Financial Officer, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and dialogue today. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Renard Adams. I'm the Chief of Research, Assessment, and Accountability with the district.
Allegra, do you and Toonie want to introduce yourselves as well?
Yes, I'm Allegra Wilhite, and I am staff with TSCC. We also have Toonie. Are you able to unmute?
Yes, I am. I'm Toonie Bechart. I'm staff with TSCC. Sorry I can't be there in person tonight, but I'll be watching, paying attention. Thank you for meeting with us tonight.
Thank you. So we want to start by acknowledging the district's receipt of the Meritorious Budget Award from the Association of School Business Officials for the 2021-22 budget. Well done. Congratulations on that award. So we'll start with your introductory remarks, and then we'll hear public comment, and then we'll ask our questions and discuss the budget with you.
Thank you, and thank you for acknowledging that our numbers line up. The theme of our budget has been out of challenging times. We move forward together. Last month, the Board of Education, serving as the official budget committee, voted to approve our 22-23 budget, which, as you know, is part of the process as we move towards an adoption. This particular budget focuses on emerging out of this global pandemic with hopefully a deeper, more complete school experience that we can make available for our students. So aside from maintaining core operations and our need to be fiscally responsible, it also leverages close to $124 million in targeted general fund dollars. It avails one-time federal dollars, state student investment account monies, the combination of those revenue streams to provide for activity in a few key areas. One, extended learning opportunities, making sure that our enrichment, our learning opportunities are sufficiently robust. That extends to summer programming, which is the broadest menu we've ever had in the history of the district, and I'm sure the state. Therefore, precisely because we recognize that there's unfinished learning opportunities we want to make available to our students. We also know that to serve our students, we've made some deep investments in the adults that support their learning, the wraparound supports, the behavioral and mental health needs. You see those as priorities that we've called out. And we also want to enrich the learning experience itself to motivate, to bring joy to our students who unfortunately have been a bit isolated over the last couple of years. So we continue our march towards more visual and performing arts, more CTE, more of the kinds of programming that engages our students. You see that. It also acknowledges that our adults who care for our students and to keep those expectations high, that we make time for their professional learning, that we place an emphasis on their ability to collaborate with one another around their observations of students. So I think our budget balances and considers all of these needs. I think it makes some thoughtful compromises. It doesn't include to the level, our wish list of activity, but I think it covers all the dimensions that we would hope in promoting the kind of learning experiences we want to see for our students. So the challenge always is the balance of activity that we're able to fund and resource with a finite set of resources. And we do have real constraints there. As we've shared with our school board, we are planning to put forth a plan for our board of directors that addresses the real question of sustainability. And so how do we strategically sort of posture our resources with that, understanding and frankly, real risk that K-12 school districts are facing in this state and elsewhere, while we maintain our agenda around student learning and raising achievement, which are our district goals. So as superintendent, I'm certainly thankful for the resources we have today, for the educators and the leaders here in the school system, because despite these challenges, we've continued to approach this work with a sense of optimism. We're certainly being creative. There's certainly always room for improvement, and we continue to sort of interrogate our practices with that philosophy in mind, because we want to do our very best at serving our students. We want to be a strong school system. I think we've come a long distance, and we have more to go, but I think our students deserve nothing less. So I'll end there for now.
Thank you. I'll now call in any members of the public who would like to speak. Each person is limited to 3 minutes of public comment, and we'll let you know as you're nearing your time. I do want to enter into the record. We received some written testimony from Mr. Eric Fruits about, in particular, bond spending and the Center for Black Student Excellence. We'll make sure the district gets a copy, and it will be entered into our records as well with TSCC. Allegra, is there anyone signed up to speak?
Yes, we have Isabel Johnson signed up to speak.
someone from the district help me. I think
Yeah.
We were corresponding. Yes,
We have been corresponding,
Good to
yes.
see you.
Hi, my name is Isabel Johnson. I'm going to be honest, I did not anticipate speaking at this meeting, but when I walked in, there was a sign up for public comment and nobody signed up, so I thought, let's take advantage of that. I'm actually signed up to speak for the 6 o'clock meeting, but I'm going to try and sort of ad-lib it now. I am the parent of a third, now fourth grader at Glencoe Elementary, and I have been attending the board meetings on and off since February, particularly over the last few months. And I did read the TSCC, some of the questions, which now I just suddenly couldn't find, but I think one of the last questions was, what are we doing to support the teachers? And I am just going to continue to advocate that one of the main things we can do for teachers is to have smaller class sizes. And I know that this comes up, and I know that, as we say, there are the constraints of the budget. I have looked a little. My understanding is that we are looking at a $900 million potentially corporate kicker, which, unlike the personal kicker, will come back to the schools. So if the $900 million, if we are, it's not, I guess it's not in the bag, as it were, but I think tentatively the PPS would be due 8% of that, which is $72 million. So I do feel that next year that could go certainly a ways in sort of plugging the holes that we are going to lose when we lose the ESSER funds that obviously won't repeat next year. So I am just hoping that this year, more than any year, teachers and students need help. And I think we can all acknowledge that. And again, when I have looked through the staffing memos, I do think that there are still classes that are very high. And I do think that the idea would be to have smaller class sizes, and I understand the budget constraints. I feel I am not as bearish on the budget as I hear the district. And it's very ad-libbed, but I just really, just from talking to teachers, there is this sense that there is a real disconnect between what their work is and the district. And they really are the district's, I think, arguably greatest resource serving our students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabel. Your comments are going to be put into our record, and they will influence our comments, our follow-ups, and our engagement with the district as well moving forward. With that, we will go ahead and start with our questions, and I think, Matt, you have the first one.
Yes, thank you, Harmony. So like many schools in Oregon and around the country, PPS has experienced a drop in enrollment. What does the district see as causing this drop?
Approximately 30,000 publicly enrolled students. And here in PPS, we are seeing, since the onset of the pandemic, an 8% drop in our enrollment. We work with the Population Resource Center out of Portland State University to help us with our enrollment projections. They have demographers there that work with us. And in working with the demographers, we're understanding 3 factors that we believe are influential in the enrollment drop. One is our parent choices about what they want for their children, meaning homeschooling and or private school. We understand there was lots of debate around masking in schools and COVID-19 measures and whether to be hybrid or online and in person. And we know that parents have choices, and we know that some parents did choose to either homeschool or private school their privately educate their children. We also know and did some internal analyses into housing costs, and we found that in zip codes where the median housing price increased greatly, we saw greater enrollment drops in those schools as families, it appears, are being priced out of the Portland metro area. Thirdly, we are understanding that we have a very low birth rate here in the Portland metro area. While adults are moving into Portland, they do not appear to be having children at the rates that they once did. And so that low birth rate then 5 years later turns into a low kindergarten, what we call a capture rate. And so we believe that those are the 3 factors that are impacting and causing our enrollment drop. And as you all, I know, are aware, it's a national issue with enrollment drops. There were just articles about LA Unified losing 40,000 students and things like that. So they've lost almost our entire school district. We also understand, and I know there was a part of the question that I believe spoke to what are our short and long-term forecasts. we update our enrollment forecast every year, and the pandemic enrollment drop has created what we believe to be some instability in the model. However, we believe right now we're projecting a steady but slow enrollment decline for the foreseeable future. However, I want to be cautious that once we have our October enrollment counts this year, we will have a new set of projections this January, and that based on how enrollment looks this fall, that long-term forecast might change. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a little follow-up on that. Can you describe what the district or strategies are for maybe bringing back students who left during the pandemic back into the system? And
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think the first and foremost strategy is having strong schools. The more we can strengthen our schools and improve outcomes for students and provide supports and necessary resources for teachers, I believe the more appealing public school becomes. We have an Office of Early Learning that does a lot of work at the elementary level, primarily in the primary grades, that's kindergarten, first and second grade, to do what I like to call, from my previous experience, a roundup, where we try to advertise that we are accepting all enrollments and that we want children to come back. And so those are the two strategies. We've got a budget that places an emphasis on building capacity and putting high quality curriculum materials in the hands of teachers with ongoing professional development and support. And we have in our Office of Early Learning kindergarten and primary grade roundup in order to sort of drum up enrollment across our elementary schools, because that's where we've seen the largest decline in enrollment.
I have a quick follow-up. We spoke with the county about the preschool, universal preschool. I'm curious how many preschool sites are housed within PPS buildings or in partnership with PPS on the new universal preschool for all.
Those are not data I have at my fingertip. I apologize.
That's okay. Go ahead, Mark.
That's a natural pipeline. Is that what your question
I
is?
mean, a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
just get 'em
I
in
know
your
there
buildings and then get them in your schools.
I know
It's a
of
wonderful idea.
the two in Southeast at Marysville and Lent, and that's certainly a conversation in the Southeast community about, championing our public schools.
But what I can say on the topic of making sure families have early education options is we've had seats available all school year. So we're also thankful for Pre-K for All, because we are adding additional classrooms, but we've had some vacant seats. So for anybody listening in with a 4-year-old, we're more than happy to accommodate you.
So continuing on this theme of enrollment, and it's not just K-12, it's higher ed, everybody is down. But one thing we noticed when we were reviewing and analyzing your budget was that although enrollment trends are down and then they're projected to stay flat or continue to drop, the FTE for employee numbers is up. And we were curious about that. Can you help us understand why?
Yeah, sure thing. More than happy to answer that. And staffing has gone up over the past few years because we've been fortunate enough to receive additional state funding through the Student Success Act. And the table on page 278 represents our teams across all funds. And as funds from sources such as Measure 98, Student Investment Account, which are components of the Student Success Act, have begun to become fully realized, so have targeted investments in additional positions, so such as social workers, counselors, instructional specialists, teachers. And similarly, late last year, the board adopted our strategic plan. And so as strategic initiatives begin to roll out, such as the adoption of new curriculum within the context of our new instructional framework, or looking to implement and transform our structures for racial equity, we're leveraging all of our funding sources to build the teams needed to carry out that work as well. And even more recently with ESSER, our one-time COVID federal relief funding, we're planning to hire additional staff as well. And in some cases avoid laying off staff as well. And really to support our schools and support key initiatives. But because these, similar to our reserves, are one-time dollars, if we are unable to identify ongoing funding, we will need to assess which of those investments stop. And as applicable, whether others continue through just a careful examination of trade-offs. So as we've looked across the years, we have increased FTE, we have additional resources, but some of those resources are one time. And it would be, when we start looking at our overall investment of leveraging $49 million of reserves with $65 million of one-time federal dollars, we're looking at $114 million less in FY24. So it would be unrealistic to consider maintaining the same level of service with $114 million less dollars, and there not be major shifts or changes to the school experience. Our largest investment is in people, and the vast majority of people are student-facing. So when we start thinking about what does that mean from a student and family perspective, assessing trade-offs also means mitigating impact to the classroom, but we'll need to contend with just the fiscal reality. So as an example, we've maintained class sizes artificially low during the past 2 years. There's been intentional investments in that, and to some extent next year as well. So when one-time dollars that support smaller class sizes go away, class sizes would adjust based on actual enrollment and the subsequent school staffing plan. Those are just kind of like the realities of some of the dynamics that happen there. And to help put it in perspective and help put the magnitude in perspective, the local option levy is about $109 million. That funds close to 900 teaching positions. Therefore, with $114 million less for fiscal year 2024, it's going to require some careful analysis coupled with some tough decisions. And right, just as a side note, the local option levy is also on our radar because come 2024, it's going to be up for renewal, right? So like fully aware and keen. So I think it's just going to speak to just the importance of putting together and planning for a sustainable future. And when we start taking all these elements around FTE growth, ongoing funds, but then also one-time funds, with a gap of about $114 million, that's something that's not going to be resolved by simply eliminating school-based positions or eliminating one department or specific job role. So it's going to be, barring a very large investment from the state, we'll need to consider a mix of how we approach this. We'll need to consider a mix of whether it's layoffs, consolidation of programs, consolidation of schools, or potential elimination of services, just to name some of the approaches and how it may be potentially phased in over time. So I share all of this from the perspective of the keen awareness of FTE being one lever of our of the resources we invest in, but also being aware of the nature, the intricate nature of ongoing funding versus one-time funding, and something that is on our radar and things we're thinking about.
So my follow-up, which we shared with you, was about impacts and one-time versus, limited dollars. We've had a little preview today from our principal about this commercial kicker, which I wasn't aware that it went back to the schools. Is that something that you'll be considering in your calculations? And I imagine you'll be talking about it later today, later tonight. So
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That was news to me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what's interesting, I think, because that's one variable to contend with, but then also enrollment as well, right? So as we approach our planning process, there's going to be this intentionality around how we tier not just reductions, but how we tier our investments and repurposing our investments, because we could be having a conversation around the kicker. So, and at the end of the day, that $114 million gap may be $30 million gap, right? That's definitely something that's a better situation to be in, and so it may require us to approach our subsequent reductions or repurposings differently, but going into it with that in mind. So it's essentially putting together a plan that accounts for some of this variability by having a mixed approach. And I like to think about it like a tiered approach. So this gap, these are like prioritized. This gap, this are some of the additional things we could consider doing or not doing or reinvesting or repurposing.
A lot of uncertainty. Thank you for your answer.
Over the last 2 years, the Southeast Guiding Coalition has helped the transition from K-8s to K-5s in Southeast, which also contributes to these enrollment disruptions. And I've been seeing conversations about everybody got their letters in the mail and which new school and their option to opt into new school, their new school next year as opposed to in 2023. And then we're seeing wholesale moves of programs, and lottery programs and focus option schools, which obviously will shift and disrupt enrollment further. Can you talk a little bit about how the district is working to stabilize these schools during the transition in particular and the costs associated with that stabilizing force?
Thank you for the question, and I do have the answer to your preschool program question. We have 49 pre-K classes across 14 of our schools. The power of text messaging.
I think it's important to add, just on that pre-K question, as the district participated in the county effort, we also host and co-locate with community-based organization Head Starts and pre-K programming. So again, lots of seats available out there.
Thank you. I will never be more happier to be wrong than if I'm wrong about enrollment and it actually goes up. To your question, we have set aside $1.2 million and 10 FTE to support stabilization efforts at the Southeast, in the schools that are impacted by the Southeast Guiding Coalition and that boundary and redistricting and program movement. Those FTE will likely take a variety of shapes in terms, because we intend to speak to principals and ask them individually what would be most impactful to them at their campuses before we simply just allocate 2 teachers here or a half of assistant principal. It's really about principals knowing their community and their campus the best and being able to advocate for what they need most. We also know and have found when we bring together staff from different schools that there needs to be a lot of community building among the adults. And so some of those funds would also, there will also be funds to cover that.
Just a quick follow-up. And in your previous answer, you all talked about, the cliff potentially next year around funding and the possible consequences of that, right? Consolidating schools or closing down schools, or certainly changing class sizes, shifting back to, or leveling off maybe back to pre-pandemic levels. So I'm just curious what the what the long-term, and maybe there isn't a good detailed answer because we don't know what funding will look like next year. But to address kind of these very small schools that we've got and then the overcrowded schools, the SCGC only addressed a small part of the whole district, right? And didn't engage with those higher enrolled and in some cases over enrolled inner Southeast schools. So you have even more dichotomy. And can you just speak a little bit to kind of what the long-term plan is to steady out these extremes in school staffing that are leading to tiny classes and huge classes, or single strand schools, or 4-strand schools, things like that?
I'll start with the first 2 sentences, but I think you called it out. We don't have a crystal ball, and so we want to get ahead of this one because it's going to be dramatic. Maybe someone has intel about a kicker or some other new revenue. I haven't heard about it. So we're going to have a plan ABC, and we're going to need to work with our elected school board to sort of start to set some parameters around, if it's this much the gap and it's extreme, what's our appetite? Because at some point, if it's a large gap, everything's on the table. And so all the hard work we've put into creating more optimal class sizes, all the additional staffing, that's counselors, it's social workers, it's, all the wraparound supports that we made a conscious decision not just to true up overnight, but to leave those in our school communities to serve our students this coming school year and this year, frankly. And so we'll have to have a plan B if that gap maybe is still big, but not. We'll have to talk about all the other efficiencies, that we're going to need to sort of have a trade-offs conversation about to close the gap. Obviously, we have a responsibility to stay solvent, as does our school board, and so we'll have to sort of start to sketch that out at a high level and start to drill down on that very question. The challenge, as you might understand, we could start early in the fall, but we don't have any clarity from the state until the spring. So this is why we need to have the tiered approach that our CFO was describing earlier.
Based on the ongoing conversation, I think on the fly, I'm going to bend the next question in a slightly different direction. We have been talking with most of our districts about the benefit, the upside and the downside of this one-time money. And this year you are choosing particularly to invest general fund, fund balance money, as well as one-time state and federal money to continue initiatives that are really important to you. But we read in your budget message, this will be the largest academic and enrichment summer program in the history of PPS. You have goals about maintaining smaller classroom size that you're able to do with this one-time money. Now I'm becoming more interested, since you have chosen the sort of defer, kick the can down the road, stay away from the cliff as much as possible. How are you going to be managing the expectations of your parent, student, and community customers? Largest summer program ever. What happens next summer? Small class sizes, you hit the cliff and class sizes surge. How are you going to manage the expectations of your constituents?
Are you available for consultation on that question? Because we've tried in each of our discussions with our school board to try to point out sort of the risks that are inherent in doubling down the stability in our school communities. We've tried to prioritize our students, their experience, their supports. It's been very hard the last 2 years for the students, for the adults that serve them as well. And so we've chosen to maintain a stability there. The question is, you've maintained an audacious agenda. Can you sustain that? Because you're making decisions now. You're going to have to rethink in the coming year. And that's the multi-million-dollar question, I think, on the table. And I think by starting those conversations earlier in the school year, hopefully we can bring in our school community and all of our stakeholders to understand, hopefully the reality that we're facing isn't, a dramatic fiscal cliff. But if it is, as a broader community, we're going to have to sort of understand that reality. And hopefully we won't backslide on a lot of progress that we have made over the last number of years. And hopefully the capacity building that we have invested in with our professionals and our staff sort of is something we get to carry forth. But we're going to need to talk about all those other accruements. Will summer school look the same next summer? Unless there's some new source of funding, it won't be. Which is too bad, but I think our students really need the opportunity for that experience now. So we're really glad to have that kind of a menu, not just for academics, but all the other engagement in partnership with community that we're making available. So maybe our CFO has a few other back pockets that he's
Magic beans?
squirreling away. And I just want to point out, I know that our school board is feeling that too, but we can't keep dipping into our fund balance because that would be clearly unsustainable.
Yeah, I think Superintendent touched on all the key things, and the reality of it is just being able to talk about it and put the cards on the table and be able to do that, and being clear, right? Like any math problems, there's two sides to the equation. There's expenditure side, And then there's a revenue side. So we talked about enrollment, that pipeline, what are the things we're shoring up to increase enrollment or retain enrollment, slow down enrollment declines, because then there's other factors that are outside our control. And so it's just being clear about that and being able to put together the best options on the table so that our board can take action to get us to a sustainable place.
Unfortunately, people have short memories. And so
yes.
my concern is I appreciate saying, enrollment, see what the fall numbers look like, but we don't really hear from the state till the spring. That's not a new cycle. That's been the forever cycle, the forever pattern. So as you look at ways of achieving better financial stability and weaning yourself off one-time monies, the conversation sounds pretty immediate to me. You mentioned that you are going to start working with the Board of Education on that. So so you have an idea about, do you have a target as to when you need to come up with the array of possibilities?
Absolutely. As a matter preview tonight, we have a high-level overview of some of the planning and milestones that we need to achieve to get to our plan for FY24. And like anything else we do, we need to be data-focused. So we are going through a data gathering phase and additional attainment of information and so that we can build understanding and have those conversations, not just with our board, but like the broader community, right? This is going to impact several facets of our community. So how are we doing that? But the idea is to have those conversations in the fall so that when we get to our December, January timeline, we have a general sense of what's our board comfortable with. Right, we're going to have to make tough decisions. We're going to have to present options, whether it's tiered approach. We don't know where the state may be come springtime, but at least put together the menu of options on the table. Because by January, February, we then need to be able to have our schools plan. We need families to know what's going on. And then we hit into our formal budget cycle in the spring, March, or April through June. And so being very thoughtful about having these conversations as early as possible, because there most likely will be some sort of disruption. So how do we start being able to plan for that and work towards having as much information as possible for our board and for the community as early as possible?
Thank you.
Another question about one of the many challenges that you're facing as a school district. And, we hear reports across the county and nationally about the increased behavioral challenges in some of our schools. And so would like to hear from you what role the district plays in supporting the affected students and what have you seen working well? What may you be investing in this budget to change and improve these conditions?
Yeah, I'd like to welcome our Chief of Student Supports, Brenda Martinick, to talk about that.
Thank you. Good evening. So thank you for the question. The things that we have done are invested in additional counselors and social workers, qualified mental health professionals. We've also contracted with culturally specific mental health partners so that we can ensure that we're providing equal access for services for all of our students. We also help with student and family engagement efforts, make sure that we're reaching out to families who are in need of additional supports. So those are just some of the things that we have continued to focus on throughout this year and throughout the last couple of years during the pandemic.
I can't help myself. Can you talk a little, obviously these challenges haven't been just for students, right? Our teachers and our staff at schools are dealing with these challenges every day. our principal has been on a medical leave for the last 3.5 weeks at our school. We've seen teachers and staff take leaves of absence from the pressures, right? Can you talk a little bit about the supports that your teachers or staff are getting to manage these challenges too?
In addition to the supports that we've been providing to students and to families, we also provide a number of different supports to our staff through HR and through benefits. We continue to have EAP. We also have continued to provide affinity groups and affinity spaces for our staff to make sure that they can connect with one another. When we are having a crisis or suicide ideation concerns for students, we come and we meet with the staff, and oftentimes we have staff that come and ask for additional support, and we certainly provide that support. We also provide those resources to make sure that our staff are getting the support that they need. And so those are the more of those individual spaces where staff can really get that help and support.
I'd like to take a longer view. I think many people erroneously think that a number of these behavioral challenges have arisen as a result of the pandemic. There's always lots of discussion about that. But these needs have been building since before the pandemic, and I expect they will continue well after the pandemic. So the increase in social workers, wraparound services, those are also the ones we just talked about in terms of one-time money. What's the district's longer-term look for maintaining services, behavioral health services to students?
One thing that we have done, and this was before the pandemic, and so these were with some of our SIA dollars, and those are ongoing dollars. Those aren't the one-time ESSER funds that you're talking about currently. What we did is we really did an in-depth engagement process with families and students and staff to where we were able to prioritize our student investment account dollars. That's actually where we hired approximately 60 staff, which is our counselors, our qualified mental health professionals, and our social workers. We also hired additional therapeutic intervention coaches specifically for our students with special needs around behavior in our behavior classrooms. Those are ongoing supports that are available, not through the one-time dollars. And so what we really did is we looked long-term at how we are going to help support students in those classrooms. So in our high schools, we have a social worker at every high school. We have social workers or qualified mental health professionals in our middle schools. And then we also have either social workers or a qualified mental health professional on a part-time basis at our elementary schools. And then we increased the FTE, we decreased the student counselor ratio, which increased FTE for our counselors K-12. Additionally, we also provided more in-depth supports in our alternative programs so that our students who are most marginalized or in those higher risk categories have that additional support as well. And those are not short-term fixes, those are long-term.
So a really commendable to Brenda's Student Services Department for the added capacity to really serve our students in the short term, but I like your question because we're also thinking about long-term. How do we really make this part of our organizational muscle? I'd like our Chief of Staff to really talk about how we've thought about that long-term and an innovative new partnership in this regard.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent, and thank you, Commissioner Norton, for the question. Jonathan Garcia, Chief of Staff here at PPS. So two long-term long-term initiatives that we're focused on. One is, as you probably heard earlier this year, the University of Oregon launched the Balmer Institute here just across the street for Fabian K-8. That is in close partnership with our school district, and it's looking to do a number of things. One, provide the professional development supports that our current staff, our current educators need. But more importantly, I think really build out the pipeline, right, of mental health professionals here in the state of Oregon and across the country. That is their end goal at the University of Oregon, and we are at the center of that. So you can imagine that that's going to take shape in a number of ways, from student interns in our schools to, again, additional mental health professionals that we can pick from. Now the question becomes the sustainability, the financial sustainability question. And frankly, as you all know, the need continues to grow in public education. Not only are we asked to educate our students, now we're asked to provide the mental health supports for our students as well. We know that the county and our state officials and our federal the nation needs to, our congressional federal delegation needs to support mental health. So we are engaging in those conversations with our Multnomah County commissioners, right, where this is their primary focus, right, to provide the mental health, the mental supports to our community. And we also know that our senator and the federal delegation is actively having conversations about increasing supports for mental health across all schools in America, because again, this is a pressing issue. So we're continuing to advocate, and we're looking at addressing this through systemic partnerships like the University of Oregon.
Thank you.
I know over the last few years we've, to some degree, suspended testing. I know it's ramped back up this year, and we've seen more MAP testing and things like that. But we'd like some information about how you're measuring progress, especially with kind of the lack of data to some degree over the pandemic, and how that's being communicated out to the community.
Sure. Thank you for the question. In accordance with the current board goals, we have been using the MAP assessment in reading, English language arts, and mathematics to understand, first and foremost, this past fall, what's the new baseline of student achievement? You've probably read and heard all the articles and news stories about learning loss, or interrupted learning is what I prefer to call it. And so we wanted to understand just where were now our students performing at the beginning of the school year. And so after the administration of those assessments, we created a presentation which was shared publicly at a board meeting, and we typically call those data dives, and we share them during board work sessions. Then again, when we retested into winter, now that we had 2 data points on most students, we looked at how much they had grown from the fall to the winter, knowing that we would expect a student in the presence of a highly qualified and highly effective teacher to grow in a half year's worth of growth. And so we looked at those data in a winter data dive. We also are measuring and monitoring our graduation rate, our secondary students' post-secondary readiness. And one of the other ways we understand academics in the school system is by doing instructional rounds and actually walking schools, seeing what's happening in the classrooms, looking at teachers' practices, at principals' organizational structures, and offering and sharing feedback about best practices in that way.
Thank you. I want to do a quick time check. Do we have a hard stop at 5:30?
Not at 5:30.
Okay. So we have a couple more questions. I'll do another time check as we go. So I'm gonna hold any. I'm gonna keep my follow-ups to myself for this one.
All right, now we're going to move on to a couple of questions about the capital projects that you have going. There'll be 2 questions. I'll start with the bond-related projects, and then my colleague will follow up with another question about other capital work that is not bond-funded. So just so that you understand where we're going here. So bond projects, the 2012, 17, 20 bonds. Lot of progress has been made. The health and safety things have been addressed in most of our schools. We've got 4 high school completions, check. We've got a new middle school, elementary school. Lincoln's going to be ready to reopen in the fall. So my first question is very straightforward, very brief, and needs only a brief answer. How are you doing with the Lincoln project financially? The lessons of the cost estimations from the 2017 bond, we're looking for progress in that area. How's that going to perform financially?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Dan Young, Chief Operating Officer. I'll start by saying I'm happy to report that the Lincoln Modernization Project is currently under budget as we approach completion of Phase 1, which is the main building. Significant work does remain, however. Phase 2 includes abatement and demolition of the existing building, construction of the new track and field and grandstands, and various off-site and on-site improvements. And these improvements will continue over the next year. That said, the project team is currently forecasting being under budget at completion in 2023. And I'll also just note that the two schools that you mentioned that opened here this last year, our middle school Kellogg and our high school McDaniel, both were completed on time and under budget.
Good progress, thank you. All right, so let's move on to the projects that are coming on the horizon. Benson's coming along, although there are funding questions about the other campus plan, the MPG, the multiple pathways to graduation. Cleveland, Wells, Harrison are on deck. Jefferson, the building is on deck, but there are big questions outstanding about the Centers for Excellence. We had expected to be hearing more about that at this hearing based on remarks that were made last year. We would start to see the plan gel for the Center for Excellence. What's in the jelly mold here?
Yeah, appreciate it. Appreciate the question, Commissioner Norton. And first, I just want to acknowledge that you're right. That we we have been going slow as a result of a number of factors, right, including COVID and the pandemic. But over the last few months, as you may have noticed, we've had public meetings around the Center for Black Excellence, including with our school board and our community partners. So, to recap, the Center for Black Student Excellence is really a collaboration with the community to define what does success look like for Black children in Portland, and particularly in the Albina community, in the Albina schools. We're talking about Jefferson, we're talking about Tubman, Boise Elliott, King, and I'm sure a few others that I'm forgetting. Right now, we are in the storming and forming stage. One of the big question marks that has been on the table is governance. And how is it that we move this conversation that is supposed to be community driven, in our schools, and how do we have the right structures in place? So our teams have been meeting, and when I say our teams, I mean PPS staff with our community partners, our community leaders in the Albina neighborhood that are instrumental in making sure that this work goes off without a hitch. In terms of timeline, I know that's a question that keeps getting raised. As we are refining this work, we have an expectation that in early or late winter, early spring is when we would have more of a master plan around a complete master plan. And when I say complete master plan, I think there are 5 specific areas that we're focused on looking at. And as you hear some of these areas, you will know that these are areas that impact the student experience regardless of location or race, ethnicity. But regardless, we want to look at, again, the experience of our students in the Albina neighborhood, in particular our Black students at the district, as it pertains to curriculum instruction, right? What do we need to do differently so that students, our Black students, can succeed? What are the student supports? We talked about mental health supports that need to be tailored and anchored in these communities. In addition, we know that we need family involvement and family supports. And so what is that? And so we're looking to create a plan, a robust plan around family supports. We also know that in the classroom, especially in our schools, our educators are an important lever in making sure our students are reading, making sure our students are proficient and succeeding in the classroom. And so we will continue to provide professional learning and tailored professional learning for these communities. And the last piece, and again, it goes back to a little bit of what you're saying. We have to do things different for our Black children, and that looks like advocacy in a different way. That looks like advocacy at the state level, at the local level. That says, if we say Black Lives Matter, if our virtual signaling continues to be that we care about our Black children, then what are we all collectively going to do to address that? And again, our governance model and what we're trying to create right now in this moment is that structure so that we can all share in that collective vision and the collective success.
If I could turn your attention for a moment to the capital or asset base of this program. We learned during the hearing before the 2020 bond, because the TSCC also holds your mandatory public hearing before balloting begins, that this center might not be a specifically defined building, and we came to accept that. We also understand that curriculum and technology is part of an acceptable capital bond. What you just described to me sounds very programmatic, very engagement-oriented, and I'm having trouble figuring out what the end asset is going to be for this project. Could you try that one?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I mean, I think, as you know, buildings are just buildings until we create what's in them, right? Until we were able to define and create those conditions. And so I think what you heard from me is, a community engagement process, a look at the program. What needs to be different? What experience needs to be different in those schools? And then how do we build the conditions? How do we build the brick and mortar to reflect that? And so we've talked about, there's a question about whether the center will be its own standalone building, possibly. But it could also mean, as Dr. Adams will share next week, and as we've continued to refine our work, one of the things that we're looking to address is making sure our kids know how to read. And so what does that look like from a building perspective? And Dan and I have spent some time talking about that. So if our focus is increasing reading proficiency, and we're focused on the Boise, King, these schools in the Albina neighborhood, what does it look like, from a building standpoint, from a brick and mortar, to adapt the libraries, to shift the libraries, to create a different type of library that supports the learning experience for these children? Again, I don't know the answer to that. The answer will come from our community and from our leaders and our educational experts. So you can imagine that across these schools, you will see improvements, building improvements, and so those are going to be only shaped by the vision and the vision of our community.
Thanks. The TSCC is known for coming back in subsequent years to check in on things. And since next year will be my last year on the commission, I can guarantee I'm going to be asking you again about this.
Appreciate it, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Margot, can I jump in? One of the other things that we do is we talk to a lot of districts. And we've spoken to the library. And they are dealing with some similar issues around flexibility. How to design a space to accommodate the changing needs of your constituents, your students. So hopefully you'll get a chance to talk to the library because they've got some really great ideas.
Appreciate the recommendation.
So as Margot previewed another question about capital projects, this is about non-bond related, about facility needs across the district. We're curious about potential air quality improvement projects. What are your plans for improving air quality in the buildings, and how will these projects be funded?
Yeah, that's a great
And what's
question.
the timeline?
That's the other part. Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. Maintaining healthy classrooms is one of the most important functions that the district does, and PPS has a environmental health and safety team that regularly monitors schools to ensure that classrooms are safe for students and staff. Over the past 2 years, PPS has used a mix of funds, including the federal COVID relief funds, to make material improvements to indoor air quality. Investments both on the physical side, including upgrading all of the building system filters across the district to a MERV 13 level. This is over 3,000 filters across the district that we maintain. And also operational changes as well, including modifying the HVAC control systems to maximize the amount of fresh air that comes into a system as it ventilates. One capital expenditure that improves indoor air quality is upgrading outdated mechanical systems, and so I will tie this back to the bond. The bond passed in November 2020 includes $75 million to improve mechanical systems throughout the district, and this is a range of improvements, including full system replacements down to targeted controls and site-specific and other smaller improvements. So it's worth noting that these improvements, so that is our plan of how we look to upgrade our systems that we're looking at going forward. Mechanical system improvements, especially large ones, are very invasive to the occupants, so we have to very carefully plan these. Largely, they will take place, the construction will take place during off hours, think summer, and when we will target these larger improvements, and so we expect them to be completed over the next 4 or 5 years.
I think we'll go one more question before we wrap up. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, I've got the last one about summer program. Congratulations on expanding and presenting the most ambitious summer program that you've ever done. That's incredible. We're very excited about that, especially at PSU, since hopefully some of those students will come in to our programs even better prepared, because of your summer program. So how many students will you serve in this program, and who is eligible to participate?
Thank you for the question. Dr. Cheryl Proctor, Deputy Superintendent of Instruction and School Communities. PPS is offering a constellation of programs to our students in grades 1 through 8. These programs are designed as a summer acceleration academy, and we aim to serve upwards of 4,000 students. Our Summer Scholars Credit Completion Program is slated to serve close to 2,000 students, and our smaller programs, including Early Kindergarten Transition, Migrant Education, Indian Education, Summer Arts Academy, and the PIL Math Trajectory Program, in addition to Leap into 9th grade, intend to serve another 80 to upwards of 300 students. So we are working with HR, and we are actively staffing for these programs, and continue to recruit our educators and our partners into meeting with us to provide such a rich and robust offering of programming.
So they won't be. I won't be benefiting at PSU because you're just going as far as 8th grade.
We actually have programming for students going into high school. Again, that is our Leap into 9th grade programs. We also offer Summer Scholars Credit Completion. Those are for high school students as well.
Okay, terrific. So everyone has said that they're struggling with, getting employees in this market. And so do you anticipate problems staffing up for this program? And if you do, what are your plans for getting adequate staffing for this program?
Yeah, well, we have hired quite a large number of staff already, and the staff that we have left to put in place for these programs, we're working very closely with HR. We are building incentives and reaching out directly to our constituents to join us and to apply. So we definitely have a plan to attract staff necessary through our working relationship with HR. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We always appreciate, I always learn something, which is great. And we appreciate so many people engaging in today's conversation. With that, I will close the hearing and open a regular business meeting of the TSCC. Commissioners, do you have any additional comments on the budget? Great. Allegra, can you review the staff recommendations for the certification letter?
Yes, I would be happy to. First, I would like to commend PPS staff. It's been a busy and challenging year, and you have made it through with the budget document, so congratulations on that. And the budget document provides, extensive information on strategic goals and statistical information, so valuable stuff for our community as they're working to understand the budget numbers. PPS staff has also just been very pleasant to work with and optimistic and cheerful, even when things are sometimes challenging. So I wanted to mention that. For the fiscal year 22-23 approved budget certification letter, we have one recommendation, and that's related to the budgeted property tax receipts and the GO bond debt fund. We recommend that the budgeted amount be adjusted to align with the approved tax levy and to include estimated discounts and delinquencies. This can be done through a technical budget adjustment before budget adoption, and TSCC staff has been working closely with PPS staff to talk about the issue, and I believe there may even be a technical amendment in the works that could be introduced. So other than this one recommendation, we believe budget estimates are reasonable for the purposes stated, and we have no further recommendations, nor do we have any objections for the certification letter.
Thank you, Allegra. May I have a motion authorizing the commission to sign the certification letter as recommended by staff?
I'll move that, Mark.
I'll second Margot.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. With that, the PPS budget for what year are we in? 22-23 is certified by the TSCC. Again, thank you so much for engaging with us and providing opportunity for the public to comment on an additional comment on the budget before adoption. We will see you next year.
Thank you.